Morning, ladies. Oops, got it. Good morning, ladies, and welcome to this week's installment of Torah with the Takeaway, Parshas Vayeishev. There are some things I've given this class before, and I felt I had to tweak it. I had to fix it, so I wanted to give it again the right way. I felt there were certain mistakes that I was upset at myself about, and I wanted to improve it this time. But we do have some amazing life lessons for all of you and takeaways. We're basically going to be speaking about Mechiras Yosef this week, and we're going to sidebar to one other issue in this week's Parsha. But firstly, I wanted to say, if Mashiach doesn't come by next year, or maybe even if he does next year, I really like to switch scenes. We'll go to Tamar and Yehuda. I've never done that before, and I'd like to try that out. But in the meantime, we've got this week's Parsha with all that it entails, and I would like to focus on what we have here with the Mechiras Yosef, because it's such a phenomenal, important lesson, and it's such an important part of the Torah. All right, so let's first deal with the sidebar. We're going to ask a question on the sidebar that I hope to deviate toward, and then we're going to ask some questions on the Mechiras Yosef, the sale of Yosef. It says in this week's Parsha, famous Rashi, almost at the beginning of this week's Parsha, it says, Vayeishev Yaakov. Yaakov dwelled in the land of Canaan. And Rashi says, it says, Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva. Yaakov wanted to live in peace. Kafetz alav rogzo shel Yosef. And Hashem decided to send upon him the whole problem of Yosef. And this is what Rashi says, Tzadikim mevakshim leishev b'shalva. Tzaddikim want to dwell in peace. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem said, Lo dayan let tzaddikim mash mesukam lahem la'olam haba. It's not enough for tzaddikim what Hashem has prepared for them in the world to come. Ela shemavakshim leishev b'shalva ba'olam hazeh. But they want it easy in this world too. We have two questions on this. This Rashi, which is right at the beginning. Vayeishev, Yaakov dwelled. Usually to dwell, there are many different words in Hebrew that could be used for the word Vayeishev, to dwell. Other words, Vayagar, he lived. Vayeishev is like Shabbos, to rest. It's more like it hints to us, it's not just to live somewhere, but it's to rest somewhere. He wanted to rest somewhere. And then then Rashi comes and tells us, we learn from this, that Yaakov wanted to dwell in peace in Canaan, and Hashem said, it's not enough that tzaddikim want the world to come, they want this world. Right away, he threw upon him the problem with Yosef. So we have to ask a question. There's an important two questions on this, actually. First of all, it sounds very strange that it's not enough for the tzaddikim, that they want the next world, they want this world too. First of all, how many tzaddikim do you know that want it easy in this world? What are they doing? Checking into all the latest hotels and art galleries, and they're eating a million bonbons and ice cream cones and all the other things they're doing. You know, is this really what a tzaddik encompasses? All the tzaddikim we know about, you remember of Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal, you went to his house, bare bones house with nothing in it. The kitchen was something you just turned around once and you already visited the whole kitchen. We not only find that, but people like Rav Aharon Leib Steinman that would crush up challah and soak it in water, and that would be his breakfast. I mean, this is how the tzaddikim live. They live with very little. And what's more so, even if whether they eat more or less, that's not the point. A tzaddik usually realizes his life is dedicated to something else. He's not dedicated, when am I getting my next vacation? Tzaddikim usually have their lives for the klal. In the Kanievsky home, you saw people would bang their pushkas. They would put holes in the wall, nail holes in the wall of the Kanievsky home to put stucco boxes all over. And people had announcements and advertisements. Their house was like a Reshus Harabim, it's called. Their house was like public domain. They didn't have any time for themselves. How we can say Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva, they wanted to dwell. Is really tzaddikim want to live like that? Can we imagine that on our terms? Even more so, Yaakov Avinu. That's what they're thinking, that they want to live. And the second thing is, Shem sounds like he's being vengeful, so to speak. God sounds like he's being vengeful. He says, you wanted to have it easy. You tzaddikim wanted it easy. I'll show you what's hard. Well, you're going to have now Yosef to contend with and all the other problems because you wanted to live in peace. Now, why would Hashem speak like that to tzaddikim? If anybody, maybe me, he could tell, you were trying to have it too easy. I have to make it harder on you. A tzaddik, he doesn't even want it hard. Hashem, so to speak, is speaking in a vengeful tone and saying, you wanted to have it in peace, so therefore you're going to get Yosef and Potiphar and all the other problems are going to befall you and your family because you wanted to be Leishev B'Shalva. That's a hint to it in the first verse of this week's Parsha. Vayeishev Yaakov. Yaakov dwelt in peace. And because of all that, he's going to be visited by all these problems. How do we understand this whole idea? So that's our first question. Our second question is this whole sale of Yosef. We're going to turn to the main thrust of today's talk. When we talk about the sin of Yosef, of the sale of Yosef, everyone makes it into this horrible thing, and we have, but yet we're told if it would be that the tribes were so guilty of selling their brother Yosef to the Egyptians, why would it be that when the Kohen Gadol wanted personal messages from Hashem, he would look at the Urim V'Tumim, the breastplate, where he had the Choshen, which had on it these stones that would light up, and each stones signified a separate tribe. In other words, the voice of Hashem only spoke, or the messages that Hashem conveyed to the Kohen Gadol that they would ask at times of war and other times that they wanted to know a clear idea as to what to do during the temple times. They would consult with the Urim V'Tumim. And what did the Urim V'Tumim consist of? A breastplate that was worn by the Kohen Gadol, but with the 12 stones of the tribes. Those stones were the ones, in other words, if they were so guilty of selling Yosef, how could their names later be for posterity inscribed on the Urim V'Tumim? And yet, and through that medium, Hashem listened to them. Unbelievable. In fact, Shimshon Pincus mentions that there is no mention beferush, which means in Hebrew explicitly. There's no explicit mention of the sale of Yosef as being a sin anywhere in Tanakh. Because there wasn't an actual, or Chazal, he says, they did not commit a sin as we would understand it here. Rav Dessler mentions, in fact, all the people mentioned in the Torah, all the tzaddikim actually, like let's say Moshe, he got angry on several occasions. He only came to what's called klal kaas. He didn't come to actual anger. He came to in the domain of anger, whatever you call that. And his domain of anger was only expressed when it was concerning the Jewish people. He didn't have a temper tantrum or anything like we could imagine. It says, Kala Omer David Shechata Eno Elatoa. Whoever said that David sinned is foolish. There's many it would take us a whole hour, but there's explanations why David did what he did with Bathsheba. It's just people that are lacking in their intelligence, that don't look into Chazal, that they think that David was lustful or whatever he was. It's not true whatsoever, because we're basing our entire prayer service on King David's words. He could have just been a lustful man. He didn't sin in the understanding the way we did. We understand it. Reuben, Kala Omer Reuben Chata. Whoever says that Reuben sinned, Eno Elatoa, is mistaken. Reuben did not sin the way we understand it. And so to speak, our 12 tribes of Israel, the other 10 Shvatim, did not sin as we can understand it with the sin of Yosef. It's a famous story that Rav Wolbe brings down. I think also Rav Galinsky, Zatzal, they both bring down. In 1857, there was, during that time, there was a beautiful, the mother of all yeshivas was called the Beluzhin Yeshiva in Lithuania. It was one of the first yeshivas, if not the first, according to many, established. And it was Rav Chaim Beluzhin, the primary disciple of the Vilna Gaon, established this school. He wanted it used to be father and son would learn together, but there were a lot of pogroms over the years. They needed a place where people could actually formally learn in order to encourage the learning to continue. So they had, a place where boys could rest, and they set up all their needs, and they set up an orderly fashion, a yeshiva. Now in Volozhin, originally Rav Chaim Volozhin was Rosh Yeshiva, but after he passed on, there were two Rosh Yeshiva. One was called the Nesiv, Rav Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was very famous, wrote a sefer called the Emek Davar and the Emek She'iltas. He was known as what's called a Baki. Baki means he knew the whole Torah. Like you could ask him anywhere in Torah, in Talmud, in anything, he knew everything. There was also the co-Rosh Yeshiva at the time was Rav Chaim Brisker, who was known as the dissector. He is still till today. A lot of people send their boys when they get, let's say 18, 19 years old, they'll send them. The most popular yeshiva in Israel is to send them to some kind of brisk yeshiva. Now, brisk is not just the kind of tea that Lipton makes. Brisk is a whole way of learning that a lot of people feel their sons should go at least for a year, because this type of learning is very intensely deep, that they dive into every word, why the word is this like this and not like that, and why they dissect the whole Talmud. The Briskerov was known, he worked so hard because he wanted to come to the truth. So he wanted the true explanation, so he had to delve deep to get to it. But what actually happened in the 1850s were the students of these two great men were at odds with each other. They didn't know which way to have the yeshiva conduct itself, because they had two very, very different styles of learning. Whereas in Brisk, they were famous for their, like dissecting. And the way that that the Nesiv learned was very much into like just getting as much information out there as much as possible. Two different ways. How should the yeshiva conduct itself? So the students were all clamoring that they wanted a one type of approach, and it could be problems in approaching the learning there if you have two different approaches. So they still stood in their places, but they went to a Beis Din to decide which way should they go with which direction should the yeshiva continue to go in. So the Beis Din said, there's only one thing we think about when we have these two Rosh Yeshivas standing by us. We think of the sale of Yosef. Because prior to this week's Parsha, there was an antagonist and a protagonist. There was Yaakov and Esav, like a bad guy. And there was Ishmael and Yitzchak, another bad guy, and Avram against the idols. But once you get to the 12 tribes of Israel versus, 10 to 11 tribes or 10 tribes versus one, we're talking about all tzaddikim. How can we rule? So by the way, they ruled at the end like the Netziv, because they felt you first need to eat before you start dissecting. If you don't have material, you can't sit there and start dissecting without enough knowledge. So they felt the primary person to rule the yeshiva would be the Netziv, but Rav Chaim Brisker would be like second in command, But that was the way they ruled that should go. But that's to show us that even then in 1850s, they were saying that there's no sin of Yosef that we know of selling Yosef rather, and it's just a question of understanding. There is many that go as far as to say that it's beyond us. We don't even understand what really happened, or that they just had a moment that Hashem misguided them, that this had to happen. But they are not taken to task as we would understand, because if they would be, their names would not be on the breastplate, and they wouldn't be considered tzaddikim and to be the 12 tribes of Israel equally at the end. However, Rav Nevin Sal Shlita says something from Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld. He said there's a verse we say several times on Yom Kippur. It says, Ki ata salchan liYisrael u'machalan l'shiftei Yishurim, because you are the one that forgives Israel, and you also wipe away the sins of the tribes that are straight. So what does it mean? Salchan liYisrael u'machalan l'shiftei Yishurim. So Rav Yosef Chaim mentions that there's two sacrifices brought on Yom Kippur. One, we bring a goat, and we also bring a cow. Two sacrifices, a bull rather, that we bring on Yom Kippur. The cow or the bull is against the sin of the golden calf, which is still a stain till today. It was such a major thing that they even entertained the idea of idolatry. Now, it was very beyond how we would understand it, but still, it was something that still needs to be addressed today. And the sin with the goat is when they took Yosef's coat. If it was a coat, there's an argument whether pasim a pas could also mean your wrist. It could have been a bracelet he was given. Some of the Meforshim say that that they dipped his coat or whatever it was in blood, like to fool their father, thinking he was killed. And they said that is the sin. So it says you are the forgiver every year of the sins of the golden calf and the sin of the sale of Yosef. So in other words, it's not gone yet. There's still a stain. So which one is it? We still have to atone for it. And how do we atone for it? What do we have to know about it from our perspective in order that we should be able to help continue to correct this stain which still sits on us? Also, there's mention of on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, we recite the Asara Haruge Malchus. We recite the terrible tragedy of the 10 great Tanaim that had to be murdered by the Romans, and some people said Shamayim, it's because of the sin of the golden calf. I mean, the sin of the cell of Yosef. How do we understand all that? So that's our second question, ladies. Our third question is that there was a lot of suffering from the sale of Yosef. Even Binyamin suffered from it, and he wasn't even involved. They say that Yitzchak Avinu, now, even though through prophecy he knew that Yosef was okay, he suffered for his son, Yaakov, who for all those years thought that Yosef was not there. Yosef thought, Yaakov was in mourning for his son, who he missed for so many years. He didn't know what happened to him. He couldn't get over it. And it's interesting. People all suffered, but there was one person that suffered the most, and that was, of all people, the least expected. That was Yehuda. We find Nevitzal brings down. Yehuda says in this week's parsha, well, Reuven tries to avoid the sale. Reuven tells the brothers, throw him into a pit. And he felt like this. The Orach Chaim HaKadosh tells us that when he threw him into a pit, they thought, okay, if he's guilty by Hashem, there are snakes and scorpions that come into this pit. If he's guilty by Hashem, they're going to kill him. But if Hashem loves him, if you're an innocent person, the Orach Chaim says that animals will not disturb you. So if he is such a tzaddik, like he puts himself out to be, you won't be harmed. But Reuven didn't get back to the pit on time. Meanwhile, Yehuda decides, Ma betza ki narokas achenu. What are we going to gain from selling our brother? Betza can also mean to break or to make a compromise. How will it benefit us? Amru Chazal, ubotzea bereich li eitz Hashem. It says in Tehillim, whoever breaks bread and benches, Hashem, he's an enemy. Hashem is fighting with him. And what does that mean, botzea bereich? It says, whoever blesses Yehuda, that he tried to make a compromise, that he said that Yosef should be sold versus murdered, he's breaking the judgment, and he tried to make some kind of compromise. He's begetter menaetz Hashem. He's an enemy of Hashem because Yehuda wanted to make a compromise. It says, kol mi shemaschil b'mitzvah. Whoever starts doing a mitzvah and doesn't finish in it, kover es ishto v'ezbanav. He ends up ultimately burying his wife and children, because we find that he started to save Yosef. He said, let's sell him, but that didn't end up saving him, and he didn't finish saving him. He buried his wife, Bathshua, her name was, and Er and Onan. They both died. They had their own sins, but they also died because Yehuda's the one that made a compromise. Now, we don't find any of the other Shvatim suffering to this extent. Nobody suffered somebody dying in their family. Yaakov suffered tremendously, and Yitzchak suffered on behalf of his son, and the other son suffered from other things. But the one that suffered the most is Yehuda. Now, what did Yehuda do? In fact, it sounds like he began to do the right thing. Why should he be punished so severely? And we're saying it's a lesson for all of us, say Chazal. Whoever starts something and doesn't finish, you're going to be in big trouble. And whoever makes a compromise, you're in big trouble. And also, the way Beis Din works is with compromise. That's usually the way Beis Din approaches any given topic. When there's a problem, they will make a compromise. They never give somebody 100% his thing when there's a Beis Din involved. So how do we understand this, that Yehuda should be punished so much? What do we learn from that? Making a compromise is so bad. And question number 4 we have for today is it says that Vayave dibasim ra, Yosef brought lashon hara to his father. How do we understand that? And that seems to be the reason that the whole thing began. How do we understand that in understanding and analyzing the sale of Yosef? Okay, let's get to the answers. First, we're going to get with this thing, a sidetrack issue, which I wanted to cover because I think it's very indicative. It's a very important lesson for us for life in this week's Parsha, why it starts out with Vayeishev. It sounds like everything occurred because Yaakov wanted the easy life. And what's wrong with wanting that? What does it mean when a tzaddik wants an easy life? What does he want it for? He wants to open his Gemara undisturbed. He wants to have time, and we can relate as women. We want sometimes to daven undisturbed, and the phone keeps ringing always when we're in the middle of davening, or something just pops up. We forgot this, we forgot that, or somebody's crying, or in the background, or whatever's happening. When we get up to daven, there's something that goes on many, many times. We want no encumbrances. And we even want Mashiach for that reason. We want Mashiach. The primary reason is to be able to serve. Well, first of all, we want Hashem to be appreciated by the entire world. But we also want that we should serve Hashem without encumbrances. That's the main reason we want Mashiach. It's not just, I want an easy life, Hashem, give me Mashiach. We want Hashem to be served without encumbrances. So what's so bad in what he wanted? So Rav Wolbe gives an answer. He says, when you're asking for shalva, that's what Rashi, the word that Rashi uses is shalva. Shalva is like shalom, peace. When you want peace, that's the next world. There's no such thing in this world. There's no peace in this world. This is not the world of reward. This is the world of trial and tribulation. That's what this world's supposed to be for. And look what Yaakov got in result for even asking for this. He has all of his adversaries were in his own home. He had love in his father-in-law, and Dinah, and Yosef, and Esav, and all family members. That's the worst when it's your own family that you have to suffer from. There can't be worse than that. And the reason why Hashem picked Yaakov depicts the Jew. He is the first one to have total, perfect children. There's nothing from him that was imperfect that resulted in another nation. There's no peace really for the tzaddikim in this world. Because Rabbi Yerucham Levovitz explains, quotes Rav Wolbe, in a factory, nobody has pillows. When you're supposed to be working, it's not a time to sleep. Now we have to sleep, we have to eat, we have to take care of our health because we want to serve Hashem. But it's not, we shouldn't expect this to be the place of things that are going to be working out perfectly for us, because it doesn't work out like that. It's not like that. Rav Chaim Brisker used to send his sons on errands. He would ask them a question in Gemara. He'd open up a Gemara, then say, go out and do this errand for me. And by the time they came back, they'd have to know the answer to the Gemara, because he wanted them to learn that you have to concentrate specifically when things are hard. And his son, Rav Yosef Soloveitchik Zatzal, his son, because of that, in World War I, he was in the field with bombs falling down. He all of a sudden looked very concerned, and people asked him, why are you so worried? He says, I'm thinking of a Shver Rambam, and I don't know the answer. Bombs were going off. Everybody was petrified, and yet the Briskers, who were trained from childhood to always learn despite hardships, they were able to prevail. We find that I can't think right now, it's not coming to me, the Mashgiach of Hebron, Rav Meir, can't think right now, just thought I had a moment. Anyways, I didn't write it down. So whatever his name, Rav Meir from Hebron, hopefully it'll come to me before the end of this year. But Rav Meir, when he had a house that was, his apartment in Israel was open to the public. All his students, they should feel like they're at their own home. So he had like a little part of his apartment where people came in all hours of the day and night to get coffee, tea, cookies. You know, he wanted his Bachram to feel at home. And he himself, Rav Meir Chadash, okay, good, the computer's still working here. Anyway, so Rav Meir Chadash, who was the Mashgiach of Hebron, he himself trained himself that no matter what would be going on, doors closing and opening, he trained himself to have the same peace of mind and calm no matter what went on. Because one has to just, if we tell ourselves right now, I'm in this predicament, I can't be like normal. Now, we can't be totally normal when there's things really, really hard, but we have to try to keep to our mission in life and not let things distract us to the best of our ability. That's what is upon us, no matter what is going on in our life. To depict the extreme of this, the mother of Simcha Zissel lost a daughter, and I think her daughter was in her 20s, if I'm not mistaken. And at her own daughter's funeral, she was the person to collect stucco in Kelm. She would always go around collecting stucco for the poor. At her own daughter's funeral, she was seen collecting, and people said, "You're an Onain, you're not supposed." She says, "Well, who else is going to collect? And this is my job. I can't give it up." She didn't let the hardships get her down in her serving of Hashem. And this is a big test for us, and that's what this Rashi means for us. When tzaddikim say it's not enough that you're going to get the next world, Hashem is not saying, "I'm taking vengeance and taking the come on you. I'm taking revenge on you, tzaddikim who want it easy." He's telling them this world is not set up to be easy. This world is set up with its challenges. And you know what? You get 100 times more the reward anytime you do something despite hardship. And you're not going to just get regular reward. Hashem says, the tzaddikim, I'm cranking it up for you because I want to give you even more reward in the world to come. That's what it means, that tzaddikim want it easy in this world. Like, in other words, they do want it easy. I think every tzaddik, everyone would like to just be able to learn as much as they could or daven as much as they could and have it all easy. But Hashem wants to set it up like that because this is not the world for that. This is the world to accomplish. And sometimes to those that merit it, Hashem gives them a harder challenge because he wants them purposely to get more reward for what they produce. Even though they may produce, it may not be as calm in their background. It may not be as nice and easy, but Hashem wants them to be able to get greater reward in the world to come. Rav Shimshon Pincus gives an example. He said, this applies, he's an Israeli example, but he gives an example of a man comes home from work. All he wants is to turn on the air conditioning and sit down with a cold glass of lemonade with some ice in it. But what happens? Sometimes the air conditioner's on the blink. He finally, I'm waiting for this minute in my day where I have the air conditioner and the ice and the lemonade, and the air conditioner doesn't work. And the ice is melting because he got 10 phone calls in between. And it's not perfect, but that's what this world is like. Rav Yisrael Salanter compares this world to a whistle. He said, in his day, you spend 2 cents on this whistle and it doesn't even blow. This world is something we put effort into it. We try to get it and we can't get the peace because this is not the terms for this world. I saw in the writings of Rav Scheinberg Zatzal, he brings down a Maharal, which comments on the Mishnah. Yefat koras ruach ba'olam haba, yoser mikol chai olam hazeh. It's better to have a moment of pleasure in the world to come than all the life of a human being in this world, all the lives of human beings in this world. But interesting, says Rav Scheinberg, if you notice, there's not a balance here. It says, great is the pleasure in the world to come, but it doesn't say pleasure in this world. It doesn't mention that word when it talks about pleasure. It just says more than all of this life is the pleasure, a momentary pleasure in the world to come. Why does it mention pleasure in this life? So he brings from the Maharal because there's no comparison. There's no pleasure. There's no serenity in this world. You can't get as much accomplished. Also, tzaddikim have to learn, and this is the message for all of us, that we can't let our happiness depend on this world because it always frustrates us. And then, we have some, we want more. Yesh lo mana ratzah masayim, person always wants more than what he has. We find that, in fact, the calmest people are the tzaddikim. A tzaddik, every tzaddik I ever saw in my lifetime, which I'm not saying I saw millions, but the ones that I had the merit to go visit or get a blessing from were the calmest people I've ever met because they're not putting all their stakes in this world, which always can disappoint. Okay, so that's that question. So we get that out of the way, but it's an important point why Vayeishev starts with Yaakov wanting to dwell in peace to teach us that our aim and goal in this world is not peace, because that's not where it can be found. But God often gives us a lot of hoops to jump because he wants us to get more reward in the world to come. And really the idea of happiness and peace has to be defined differently as to what can I accomplish with my life. That's got to be what we put our focus on. What can I accomplish with myself? What midos can I work on? How can I improve my character? How can I improve my davening? How can I improve my chesed? All the things that I want to do with my life. How can I improve myself? That's got to be our focus. And with that, the only one it's dependent on is myself and nobody else. So we can't depend on this world at all. Okay, now let's get into the sale of Yosef. Yosef had a dream. And in the dream, he saw his brothers bowing down to him. Vilna Gaon tells us that a prophet is not allowed to repress a prophecy. So he goes and tells his father that he's telling everyone, tells his father that I had a dream that this happened to me. Now, the brothers interpreted it as, you see, we're told that 99% of dreams are fake. We're not getting prophecy. 1% has a possibility of being prophecy, but 99% of people, let's say, or whatever is going on, 99% of dreams are just things that we're worried about during the day or thinking about, and 1% are actually true dreams. We find Revolba brings down that there was once in Lomza, in Poland, there was a big argument that erupted. It got to the point where the boys in the yeshiva were like they're about to beat each other up. There was some kind of conflict that went on. And right in the heat of the conflict, when it was at its worst, all of a sudden the Chafetz Chaim appeared on the scene. And they asked him, what are you doing here? Did you know that this was all going on right now, that we needed you badly to kind of put things straight for the whole boys of the yeshiva? And he said, well, my son-in-law was himself a great man. He said, my son-in-law had a dream that there was a fire in Lomza. So I figured that meant there was an argument, a huge argument in Lomza, and I went to check it out. And I merited to be here at the right time. Tzaddikim often have very important dreams. Rav Chaim Kanievsky, if you read his biography that came out this year, it mentions a whole chapter on the dreams he had. He dreamt in learning all night. He dreamt learning. And one time, Rav Ashi from the Talmud came and spoke to him and answered some questions he had. Like, that's his kind of dreams. So some people have very meaningful dreams. If you're tzaddikim, and, there's a big thing in sleep of correcting. The angels, the malachim, take care of us at night and do correction on things that we need improvement on. And that's what sleep does. There's actual spiritual, besides the physical, there's spiritual correction. Our souls, according to many commentaries, go up to heaven at night, leave our bodies, and then bang, when we wake up in the morning, it's back with our body again. And there's certain corrections done at night. And tzaddikim, their dreams express that. That's why some people do have dreams about people that are not in this world anymore. But most people, says Revolba, do not merit these kind of dreams. Most people, the dream about the things they're worried about, their anxiety or depression or, things you want to fix that you can't fix, frustration, all the things that are there. We mentioned years ago when we had a tefillah class, we mentioned where Victor Miller comments on the pasuk in Tehillim, Yerananu al mishkavosam, that when Mashiach will come, it says that people will rejoice on their beds. Why? Because he says, even if you try so hard to control yourself, it's going to come out in your dreams. Any frustration, depression, anxiety, anything you feel during the day is going to come out in your dreams. When Mashiach comes, we'll be so happy that even in our dreams, we will be rejoicing, because there will be all the understanding of we'll see just good when in the Messianic age. We won't have to have these things that come upon us in the middle of our sleep. So Yosef had dreams. So he felt he can't repress a prophecy. The brothers said, wait a second. The dreams are about him lording over us. They see him fixing his hair every day. The Rambam says in Hilchos Malachim that a melech, a king, has to get a haircut daily because he has to have this perfect look, because we're just human beings. We have to see something perfect in front of us, and that helps us. That's why a shul should be pretty. The Aron Kodesh should be beautiful, because then it enhances your feelings toward Hashem. We're just human beings. We need this prop to help us appreciate better. So a king had to be like perfectly groomed all the time, like Mr. Perfection. And so Yosef had these things that he's supposed to be some type of leader. He fixes himself up, or that he's representing his father's Torah. Yosef was really he's the one that he was the lookalike to Yaakov, because that meant really Yaakov's primary Torah was supposed to be through Yosef. It was supposed to be the Bechor from Rachel. He was supposed to be his follower. In fact, in the Ushpizin, the only one we mention of the tribes is Yosef. Yosef was supposed to he was supposed to be the transitory figure, says Rav Leff Shlita, between the forefathers and the 12 tribes. He was that transitional figure, was Yosef. So he felt he had to look perfect because he was representing his father's Torah on earth. But they interpreted it, they said, look, Yishmael was a threat to Yitzchak. Esav was a threat to Yaakov. And this is the one brother that's a threat to us. Plus, Yosef spread Lashon Hara to his brothers. Now, I saw it in Rav Galinsky and in Rav Pam's farm. They brought down a sefer called Afike Yam. The Afike Yam tells us that when it says, Vayave dibasam el aviv, he brought bad speech to his father. There's a difference, as Afike Yam says, being motzi diba. Usually the expression is used to be motzi diba, to lahamotzi lechem min haaretz. When we say that bracha, it means you're extracting bread from the earth. Through 12 different activities, we are bringing forth bread from the earth. You're extracting. It's an extraction process. When you motzi diba, when a person speaks Lashon Hara, you're usually extracting. You're exaggerating. You're saying the part that you want to say and maybe leaving out the part that, that judges the person favorably. You're not bringing out the whole story. By Yave diba, when he brought the evil speech to his father, he brought in its purity. He brought it in its entirety. What did he say? There was basically an argument between the brothers and Yosef as to what their status was. Now, Yosef, they say, followed his father's footsteps here. Yosef felt that the status of the 12 tribes at this point until Torah was they were considered Noachites. So there's like one halacha where Noachites and Jews differ, and that is, believe it or not, with shchita, slaughtering meat. Now, by a Noachite, and by usually in the Torah too, you're not allowed to eat what's called Aver min hachai. I hope everybody is not eating at this point. You're not allowed to take an animal, God forbid, it's considered extreme cruelty. This is what Nebuchadnezzar did, and like rip off its a leg or something. It's very cruel, and it's forbidden even by the Noachide laws. So by the Noachide laws, there's a little question. After one slaughters an animal, okay, the animal could be still quivering. An animal could have his head chopped up. They see there's chickens, the Brisker chickens walk around without heads for a few, I don't know if it's seconds or minutes, I don't know. But they're like quivering. And then the question is, can you then take them to butcher and start doing what you have to do with them? Are they considered dead or not? So according to the Noachide laws, they're considered not dead. Until every movement stops, you can't deal with this meat. Whereas by our halacha in the Torah, it's not considered Aver min hachai. When they shecht and whatever they do afterwards, it's not considered Aver min hachai, because it's still, technically speaking, I don't know what makes it technically killed, but when it's geschachten, when it's slaughtered, whatever that means, I haven't been in the field, thank God, at least in this Gilgal. I don't know if I'll ever be. I don't know if I ever want to be. But in any case, a shochet, to deal with it afterwards, for a Noachide, you'd have to wait until all movement ceases. For a Jew, in halacha, it would not have to cease. You could deal with it right away. So he felt they were B'nai Noach, and he felt that that you could deal with the animal after it's slaughtered. Whereas the brothers felt, no, we're B'nai Yisrael, we can't. I'm sorry. I switched to the other way around. They would deal with it with quiver, the brothers, because they felt that we're Jews, we're allowed to deal with it. Whereas Yosef and Yaakov both felt, no, we're still Noachites. We don't have to deal with this we have to deal with the quivering, and we cannot do anything to the animal unless the quivering is stopped. The other thing he accused the brothers was that they belittled their maidservants. Now, according to Yisrael, if somebody marries a maidservant, they either have to convert, or they have to be freed in order that the children, the offspring, would be considered Jewish. So thus, they considered the Bnei Hashpachos, the maidservants' children, as not fully Jewish like they were. So they belittled them somewhat. Whatever that means, we don't know. I don't think it means that they actually put them down. I can't believe the 12 tribes of Israel would, but there was some kind of slight denigration that they weren't considered full-fledged Jews. Whereas by Yaakov and Yosef, they felt that these tribes, Bnei Noach, considered if you married somebody, you don't have to free them, they're considered full-fledged wives. So they didn't belittle. They felt it was in their way. In other words, they were going against the way Yaakov perceived things, and they were already quickly assuming themselves to be Jews when it was in opposition to the way Yaakov viewed things. And also, they were told, Yosef said that they felt he was talking to the Canaanites too much. That's what they said about him. But he felt he was a Jew, to Canaanite women. He felt he was a Jew and he could do that because a Canaanite woman is considered different. She's not a Jew. She's something else. He didn't feel it was going to lead to anything. Now, whatever talking means, I'm sure he didn't have any intimate talking with Canaanite women, but it meant he addressed them in a certain way, whereas the brothers felt it was very wrong on his part because switch it around, made a mistake. Again, the brothers who assumed they were Jews felt they could speak to Canaanite women. Yosef felt no, as Noachites were all on an equal footing, you should not be speaking to Canaanite women because it could lead to something else. So that was the strictness because being a Noachite. So in 3 cases, well, 2 out of 3, Yosef and his father were more strict. In the case of marrying the maidservants, they were less strict, but these were the 3 basic arguments between Yosef and the other Shvatim. And because of this, he spoke to his brothers, to his father about his brothers. And this is basically what led to the whole thing. When they heard he's speaking against us, and he's fixing up his hair, and he's having all these thoughts of grandeur, they thought he's what's called a rodef. He's called a pursuer, and habala hargacha hashkem b'hargo. Whoever comes to pursue you, you should be there first. So they felt they have to get rid of this menace, Yosef. And Hashem closed their eyes to this. Closed their eyes. They didn't see anything. Now, what did they do? It says, V'lo yachlu dabru shalom. They couldn't speak. They couldn't speak to him. They were so upset at him, they couldn't speak to him. And Rav Wolbe said this is a faux pas on their part. He says that there's such a thing, there's a halacha in the Torah, you're not allowed to hate your brother in your heart. Lo sistan sachicha bilvavecha. What does it mean to hate your brother in your heart? It means, halachically, you're not allowed, if you don't speak to somebody 3 days in a row because of your hatred, that's considered hating someone, and you're not allowed to do that. You're not allowed to fester in your heart, something. So Rav Wolbe says, even Rachel Imenu, when she was upset at her husband, that she felt he wasn't praying enough for her, she said, Havali banim, bring me children. She was upset, but she said something. He said there's 2 things you can do. If you're upset at somebody, you have to make a calculation. If you feel you can talk to the person, then so be it. You should tell them in a nice way, this is really bothering me. You should tell them that. If you feel the other person will not listen to you, there are people in this world that don't accept rebuke. You feel this person will not listen to a word I say. I know it. I already know they're always right. They never think they're wrong. Then what you have to do is to swallow it. But to be angry and not to speak to them, that's forbidden. That the Torah forbids. The worst thing, says Rav Wolbe, is to give someone the silent treatment. I personally experienced it with a friend that I had years ago. It was torture. The person didn't talk to me for days. Absolute torture, to do that to somebody. So, if we speak to the person, sometimes they can defend themselves or they can apologize. If we can discuss it, this bothered me, and the person will, and if you're ready to hear it, then the person often has another side to the story. We can hear it. But if the person is going to, just make a whole argument, we can't do that. And then in that case, you have to be prepared to swallow it and still deal with them as you would normally deal with them. He gave a story, Revolba, of a child that did something wrong, and the parents were so furious that they didn't speak to the child. They didn't speak to him at all. The child just asked a few questions to the parents. They ignored him. But what the child did was he took a stick and he gave it to his mother and he says, please hit me. Just talk to me. He said, like, the worst thing, if somebody doesn't talk to somebody out of anger, you're showing you don't even matter to me. Some people think they're doing this great thing. They're not screaming and yelling at somebody else. Okay, that's not the preferred way either. There should be something in the middle. But to not say anything and hold it in like that and to feel that anger fester within you, that is telling the other person you are nothing. You're not even worth speaking to, you little nothing. You're not even worth it. We are with silent treatment is the worst. They said even psychology today, Mahavdil says that that parental neglect is much worse than abuse. The worst thing is to neglect a child, to make you feel like you're not even important to me. We're told, Medrash brings down, Gracious Rabbah, Revolba says, Kisharatzisa nasata belibam leho. When you wanted, you made the tribes love Yosef. Kisharatzisa nasata belibam lisno. When you wanted to, you caused them to hate each other. Lo hayakan bechira. There was no choice. It was beyond their decision. But why is the whole thing written down? To teach us there was a tiny amount of hatred that they had for Yosef. Like, okay, let's say you are the guy, the antagonist, to come to hate, they had a little bit of jealousy there, but it's not on our terms. It's not like we would be jealous. It's definitely not the way we would act if we were jealous or if we were angry. In their heart, they were judged because midos, our character traits have to be perfected. And if they're not perfected, it's passed down to other generations. The trace of jealousy and the trace of hatred, which was with them, was a big problem. We find a famous story about the Chafetz Chaim. We're supposed to know something. Before I tell you the story of the Chafetz Chaim, when a person feels hatred to somebody else or anger, why did you do this to me? We have to know that there's an element of God making this happen. It's not just you did this to me. God made you do it to me. That this person was okay. They were the antagonist here. They were meant to be the person doing it to me. But would we feel the same way if they did it to our neighbor? We wouldn't feel the same. It's because it's me that we're getting so upset at the other person. It's covered. We don't like that somebody else is bothering us. So we have to feel that when something happens to us, it's Hashem's doing, and we have to look if we can pull ourselves back from the picture and realize this person's just a messenger. Somebody once stole something from the Chafetz Chaim, and he ran out of his door after the thief saying, "I michael you." In other words, I don't want you to be blamed in heaven for what you just did to me. He didn't have this personal, he worked on himself to such a degree, such aware of Hashem's presence and everything in his life. He realized it's not the person that's bothering me. I'm meant to go through this. That's what it is. So far, what we basically talked about, how this world is futile, we can't expect anything, what we did, the mechanics of the sale of Yosef and what they did wrong, how terrible the silent treatment is to someone else, and how really they were innocent. They didn't mean anything bad. And also, Yosef did not extract Lashon Hara, he just brought them as it is. Now, what did Yehuda do wrong? What did Yehuda do wrong that he's singled out as the one that lost children and wife and everything? He started a mitzvah. He wanted to save Yosef. The other brothers actually wanted to kill him. Shimon and Levi wanted to kill Yosef. And Yehuda was the one that stood up. What did he do wrong? So Nebenzahl says, he made compromise. Now, usually we said a Beis Din makes compromise. That's how Beis Din functions. But the purpose of compromise in Judaism is to benefit both sides. Unless it's clear that one side is 100% right, the compromise cannot be at the expense of one person. So Yehuda felt he wasn't sure that Yosef was guilty. So if he's not guilty, why are you going to let him endure slavery or whatever else it entails, him being brought down to Mitzrayim? Why don't you go all the way? You were the king, you were the potential king, you're the melech of the Jewish people, Yehuda. Why don't you take the responsibility and see to it that all the way he gets free? You know, because sometimes compromise is very poor. Like here, he saved his life, but he sent him into slavery. That's benefiting the brothers, but it's not benefiting Yosef. Rav Nebenzahl gives an example. He says, let's say somebody comes to Beis Din and they said, you know, I was told I was getting a cow, and the cow only has 2 legs. Now, if the Beis Din says, well, cow usually has 4 legs, yours has 2, so let's get you a cow with 3 legs, and then we'll have a compromise. That's not a good compromise, because in this case, it's not benefiting the buyer. They're not getting what they thought. Here in Yosef's case, he was supposed to, there's times for a compromise, but in this case, Yehuda should have gone more to bat to make sure it went all the way. And that's why if you start with a mitzvah, it's not enough to just start and you think, oh, I started it off. Well, if you can't go further, you can't. What can you do if it's beyond your control? But we should learn a lesson. When we want to do something, we should try to make sure to see it through to the best of our ability. Maybe that's one reason why we escort our guests out of our house. You know, it's not just enough to have the guests, but to make sure they leave our house happy and hearty and all the things we want to see them do. It says that Yehuda, in fact, the reason he wasn't at the end, he's still on the breastplate of the Kohen Gadol, is because Yehuda corrected himself. When Yosef, who was the viceroy of Egypt, asked that Binyamin be brought down, or else he's gonna, do something to them. Yehuda said, I will take responsibility. You could put me in jail. He took responsibility that Binyamin should not be harmed. This time he saw it through and he fixed it. And even his offspring, David HaMelech, was well known when there would be a monetary dispute and it would be a poor person involved. David HaMelech would sometimes say, okay, you're chayev, you owe money. But what would David do? I'm paying on your behalf. He would see it all the way through. He made a pshara. The person had to pay. But David HaMelech did not want it to be at the expense of a person who couldn't live giving the payment that he had to give. David HaMelech took it upon himself to make sure that the person that owed the money, if he was poor, that he would take the thing on himself. He would pay out of his pocket. So when Yehuda offered to go in the place of Binyamin, he corrected this mistake. And that's the same thing we find. This is the midah. This is the attribute of a king. So if a person, and we're supposed to, even though we're not kings here on this Torah with a takeaway, we are supposed to all try to be like kings. We're all Jewish princesses here, hopefully, and we don't mean it being spoiled, like a Jap or whatever they call them. When we talk about being a Jewish princess, what we're talking about is that we're supposed to be people that take responsibility. The tribe of Yehuda, Nachshon, when they had Kriyas Yamsuf, he saw nobody was moving. He jumped in first without any questions to demonstrate that he was taking responsibility for the tribe of Yehuda. And that's how we're supposed to do. We're supposed to emulate that trait in our own ways. And we all have positions of greatness in some regard. We're the matriarchs of the family or whatever it may be. We have to show that we take responsibility. And that's emulating Yehuda's thing. It's the same thing we find by Hanukkah, that they wanted pure oil. They didn't want to compromise, says Rav Nebenzahl. They wanted the purest oil, the oil that would be used by the Kohen Gadol, not just any olive oil will do from the supermarket. And the same thing, if we want Mashiach to come, says Rav Nebenzahl, we can't make compromises on things that aren't ours, and we can't shirk responsibility. We have to take full ownership. And like, for example, there's a lot of things going on now. There's a lot of gatherings of people, and it involves Reform, Conservative, Orthodox. These are questions for rabbis, whether we should attend these things, because sometimes you're compromising tznius, like you're putting boys in harm's way with a bunch of girls there. Sometimes you're compromising. There's a lot of, we are all unified as Jews. We're supposed to be unified with our brethren, with all that's going on now, but not compromise any of our halachic principles, And this is very important. The story about the Chafetz Chaim, one time, sometimes we could compromise, but sometimes you can't. The Chafetz Chaim once tried to talk a businessman into keeping Shabbos, and he had a factory, he said, Rebbe, I've got certain things I have to finish, certain business I have to finish. I'll keep Shabbos in 3 weeks. I need 3 more weeks to be able to work during the week, whole weeks, and then I promise you, Rebbe, I'll keep Shabbos. Chavetz Chaim says, I maybe would compromise, but it's Hashem's Shabbos. It's not my Shabbos. I can't compromise on such a thing. When something's true, we can't compromise. And we learn from Yehuda, he was not a person, he made a mistake by compromising. If we mean good, we mean well, let's make sure we're doing it under supervision, Orthodox supervision, that everything we do is something that Hashem approves of and that we can be proud that we're keeping. So again, let's just review what we said. The next world is the world of peace. This is the world of challenge. And Vayeishev Yaakov, we brought it on because we're not supposed to look for peace. Of course, if we could get a vacation, go for it. But if it doesn't happen, remember, you're in the world where you're not supposed to expect a good vacation. You know, you're not going to get necessarily your lemonade with ice and a mazgan and an air conditioner. Remember how terrible the silent treatment is to somebody else. Either swallow it or talk it out with the person to have peace. Remember, these people had no choice in what happened in the sale of Yosef, but the lessons we have are forever. We have to keep making sure on Yom Kippur that we aren't guilty of sinna, of jealousy and hatred. Like there was a smidgen of it in our forefathers, and we can't have a smidgen lying in ourselves. Make sure that we know what motivates us and that we're motivated by our good character traits and not by things like respect that we want. And that how important it is. We have tremendous influence in this world, and we have to realize we have a mission, the torch to bear, and we have to do it properly. I'll just end off with a thought that Rav Wolbe brings down very interestingly. He says in this week's Parsha, there's another Rashi. It says that when Yaakov looks back, when he looks back at the end of last week's Parsha, it talks about all the leaders of Edom, all the Edomites. And Yaakov said, there's so many enemies I'm going to have. How am I going to fight it? Who could conquer all of them? And it says that Yaakov is going to be like a fire and Yosef is going to be a torch. And then they're going to destroy Esav ultimately at the end of days. All the evil will be erased. How do we understand this? Or he says a very interesting concept, Rav Wolbe. He says that the idea we should know, instead of going and looking outside of our own fields for knowledge, often all great things that ever happened to this world started with the Jews. He said, for example, philosophy with Aristotle and Plato, Socrates, they all changed the face of this world and how they viewed life. But all those three major philosophers all consulted with our prophets. They knew Yirmiyahu, they knew, and they spoke to, they knew of him and they spoke to him. He said it was Nevuah. It was the Jewish spiritual influence which ultimately led to philosophy. He said we find Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was into soul searching and knowing what motivates you, and that brought about the whole psychology movement. It all emanated as a result of the Jewish influence in the world. These kind of things just don't come by themselves. And there's many such things that it originated with the Jews. We have to know we make an impact on the world. Everything we do, even if it's in in the intimacy of our homes, every time we do something spiritual, we have an effect upon the whole world. And that's the idea of Hanukkah, not to compromise, to know that we light up the world with all the things that the Torah has to offer, and that we can make a big difference, and we shouldn't compromise when we're going to do something right. Of course, we should compromise with something wrong. We shouldn't have hatred and jealousy. And hopefully we can employ some of these ideas and bring them into Hanukkah. I thank you all for listening. And now we can mute and we're open for questions or comments or whatever. Any questions?
Hi, one moment. I'm just going to stop the recording. Thank you.
There was a part where Reuven disappeared. Do you know where he went?